Hey, Gal and Mayan here. Welcome to the Coffee Talkie Show, the podcast for women living abroad. Today we have a special guest with us, Nissrine. Together we will discuss how moving to a new country affects our habits and overall well-being.
But first, let us introduce you to our guest, Nissrine. She is Lebanese born, Canadian grown, and currently lives in Italy with her husband and 7 years old daughter. She's a registered holistic nutritionist and mindful nutrition and self-care coach who helps women nourish and care for themselves with balance and consistency so they can look and feel their best without extreme diets.
We invite you to grab your coffee and notebook and give a big, loving welcome to Nissrine.
So, welcome, Nissrine, and maybe we'll start with you. Just tell us a little bit about your personal experience of moving abroad.
Okay, so I moved abroad for the first time in 2007. That's if you don't count my first move abroad. So, oh gosh, I go rewind. So when I was 7 years old, my family immigrated from Lebanon to Canada, and that's where I grew up. So for all intents and purposes, Canada feels like home. And so when I say I moved abroad, I usually refer to back in 2007 when, as an adult, I decided on my own accord to move abroad. So yeah, so apart from my first immigration experience, when I was turning 30 in 2007, so now I'm dating myself, but that's okay. I decided that I wanted to live abroad, to have an experience abroad, because it's something I had always wanted to do for as long as I could remember. Like, I remember as a teenager, I always dreamt of living in Paris, for example. And then I never got around to doing it in my, teens and 20s. And so when I was nearing 30, I thought, now's a good time to do it. I was in a pretty good job. I had a nice, cushy savings account. And I thought, if now, I wasn't married, didn't have kids, I'm like, this is a good time to just do this. And of course, because I'm really responsible by nature, I'm a Capricorn, nothing could be just like get up and go, right? So I planned it meticulously. I signed up for this fashion management program in Milan, Italy, because I have a background in marketing and business development and things like that, but I'd always dreamt of working in the fashion industry. So I thought, okay, I'll combine the two somehow. I'll do this fashion management course. So that way I have something to do when I get to Italy and it's not just kind of roaming around Europe doing nothing. And so I signed up for that, a year in advance. And so I had a year to kind of prep myself and things like that. And then I picked up and moved. I had like an Italian English dictionary in hand. And I was determined that I wanted to learn the language when I got here. Like, I thought, I'm not going to be one of those people who arrives and just relies on English. But I didn't take any courses. I was just like, I'm going to do this. I was like reading my books and my dictionaries. And that was my first experience, abroad away from my family. And I got to Italy and I had booked myself this, this small little like room in this like, it wasn't a hostel, it was like a hotel, but it was like a bed and breakfast type hotel. And I thought, okay, this is going to be good. And I'm going to, and I just remember like feeling so overwhelmed in those first few days. Like, I was so excited and I wanted to go out and sightsee, but I was jet lagged. And also the Capricorn in me wanted everything resolved yesterday. Like, I wanted everything to be done now, And so there was this like element of excitement and wanting to go out and explore and learn how things were done. And then there was this other element of like overwhelm and fear. I'm like, oh my God, what did I do? So yeah, that was the first sort of segue into me coming, and then there was the whole experience after that. But yeah, that was the first bit of it.
Wow. So, and I guess you kind of love this first experience because right now you are living in Italy. So you chose to do that full time, right?
Exactly. So 2007, I came and I was here for 8 months in total. And then due to visa things and, things not working out the way I had planned, I ended up going back to Canada. But it was all very positive in the sense that when I was here, my goal was to find a job in the fashion industry, and I did. And they wanted to sponsor me to stay, but the process was so long that I had to go back. And while I was waiting out the visa process, they offered me a job in North America. And so I accepted that. And it was supposed to be like an interim thing until my visa was ready. But by the time my visa was ready, I actually decided to stay in Canada. Um, and as the universe would have it, so I decided to stay in Canada. I was supposed to come back here in January of 2009. And I decided that I would stay there for the time being and maybe explore, another move abroad after. And just a couple of months later, my husband, who's Italian, arrived we didn't know each other. So just a few months after I decided to stay in Canada and not move back to Italy, he moved to Canada on like a work experience thing for a year. And then we met through a mutual friend. So it was almost like the stars were aligning and kind of things were happening, and it was weird because I thought if I had moved here, we probably wouldn't have met, Even though he eventually came back here, we would have been in two different cities and we wouldn't have, we may not have crossed paths. Or I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Sliding Doors. Maybe we would have later on, right? Who knows, right? But it was just the way the stars aligned. So he moved to Canada. We met. We were together while he was in Canada, and then he moved back here, and because his visa expired and all of that stuff. And then I was traveling a lot for this company that I worked for across North America, but also to Italy. So we were able to see each other quite a bit for a long distance relationship. And then we ended up getting married in 2011 and I moved here. So at the end of 2011. So now I've been here for 12 years. Yeah.
Wow, wow.
That's a long journey as an expat in Italy. I love that.
Yes, yes. And a beautiful, I love that you mentioned that it feels like everything was aligned, and things happen for you and for a reason. And sometimes we have a hard time to see it this way, but things just work out. And so you're in Italy right now for 12 years, as you mentioned. And I guess that you came across a couple of challenges along the way, to say the least. But I want to focus today on health because we'll get to it for in a moment. But I want to ask you, have you, experienced any challenges maintaining a healthy routine after arriving to Italy?
Yeah. So when I first moved here, it was before my time like I wasn't a nutritionist yet. I was doing something completely different. Like I said, I was working in the fashion industry and I moved here and I remember being really, really stressed out in my job when I was, in that sort of hustle, like all constantly traveling, completely burnt out. And then I moved here and I was like, oh, I have to find a job. I have to find a job and I have to, continue this career trajectory. And I hit a lot of roadblocks because it was like, oh, you don't have European experience. But you're too senior for the junior roles, right? So I was like, you don't have enough European experience for the senior roles, but you're too senior for the junior roles. And everybody kept turning me down. And then eventually I did get a job, for a really, I won't name the name, but a really high, high end fashion label. And I was miserable. Like I felt like I was in the midst of The Devil Wears Prada, Yeah, like I felt like Anne Hathaway in The Devil Wears Prada, and it was like multiplied by 100. Like I was just miserable and sick to my stomach going into work. And I thought to myself, like, I'm too old for this. Like, not in a bad way, but I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to schlep. Like, I'm 35. Like, I've done my time. I built up my career, and like, I'm not going to do this from scratch. I'm not going to be that person. And so it just wasn't worth it for me. And also because, would have required a lot of travel and a lot of like long hours. And I just didn't want it anymore. I was burnt out. So I took a break. And when I took a break, my health actually started to kind of decline a little bit, oddly enough. Looking back now, I think it was just a culmination of all this stress and overwhelm and change all at once that it just kind of all culminated, and it kind of came up when I slowed down, you know? Or maybe it had always been there and I just hadn't paid attention to it, and so I started to feel really off. And I ended up doing some nutritional therapy to kind of feel better, and it completely changed my life. I was like, wow, whoa, like who knew that you could feel so much better just by changing up a few things and how you're eating and how you're living your life and things like that. And so that's what sort of took me back, got me to where I am today, which is to studying holistic nutrition and helping people sort of make lifestyle changes to feel their best. But all of that being said, I think, when you move to a new country, it can kind of destabilize you in different ways, even if it's something that you wanted to do and you're, willingly doing it and it's for the good and you're happy about it. It can be destabilizing, and you're exposed to a lot of new things and a new environment and new challenges. And things can come up sometimes, even like with the change in food and the change in lifestyle and the change in, the setting, can maybe trigger some things within you, right? And leave you feeling a little bit destabilized, which can, influence you mentally and physically.
Absolutely. And I love that you mention it because we see it so many times. We've seen it on ourselves so many times how, just by changing a location, so many changes around you, and it really affects our body and our health. And, food is different, and add to this the stress, and
You,
it's,
I even think about the fact that I don't know, I'm sure you experience it as well. Your hair is different in different places. The water is different. And like you might use the same shampoo and the same product, but it's just not the same. And I remember like being so frustrated when I moved to France because I was like, what's going on
yeah.
here? Like it doesn't work.
Yes.
And then you're trying so many other things, and it's like it's those tiny habits that we're so used to. So like hair is one example, but what we eat, how we sleep, the light outside, like the fact that there is like in summer in Paris and in Italy I guess as well, like light is super early, light is until like you have light until super late, so your sleep is different because of it. There are so many things that are impacted that we don't think about them.
Yeah, absolutely. The hair thing is a huge one because the water is so hard in Europe. I mean, you have hard water all over the world, but compared to Canada, for example, it's much more calcium concentrated here. And so I had a huge issue with my hair. Nothing was working. Like every time I'd wash my hair and it felt like there was still this like film of like, dirt on it. And I'm like, what is happening? It feels more dirty now than it did before I washed it. And it's funny that you mentioned that because I have a post on my blog that went viral, and it doesn't really have anything to do with what I do as a nutritionist, but it was about how I manage the hard water and that causes the sebum buildup on my hair. And it blew up, and everybody's like, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. Like it was like this, everybody's having this problem, not just me.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's like I'll just mention, it's those little things that makes your day-to-day life harder or simpler when you understand that you can adjust yourself, make some changes, like you said with the nutrition, for example. It's some small changes, adaptations, and things are, rolling again. It's everything is going as you want to, but you need to adapt your life. And nutrition, hair, sleep, everything that you do today, those really, really affect our day-to-day life.
Absolutely. And also, I think acceptance is such a big one too, because when we move to a new place and we start a new life, quote unquote, right? Even if it's, like I said before, it's for the better, it's for the greater good, and you're happy about it. And sometimes we mourn our old lives and we get sort of caught up in that mourning and that sort of wanting everything to be as it was. It's like we want that life here, right? And we don't and we don't stop to realize that what's not possible, right? So instead of like spending years, and I know people who have been here in Italy, like I know a lot of expats now because I've joined expat groups, and there are people who are still holding on for dear life to this life, right? As opposed to moving forward. And I think that's probably one of the best things you can do for your mental health as an expat, is just to embrace the change, embrace the location, let go, right? Like you're in a new place, you've made the decision to be there. And even if you didn't, maybe you moved because your spouse has a job opportunity, it's still kind of like a family unit decision, right? Embrace it and kind of learn to grow with it, and it can be really freeing to do that, like really liberating to finally say, you know what, I'm going to stop mourning my old life and wanting things to be as they were home here. And I'm going to figure out how to make a new normal for myself in this place. And for me, one of the key things, and it's going to sound so silly, but it's when you move to a new place, go to all the supermarkets. Literally just shop at every single supermarket, like a different one every day until you find the products you like. And if you have to like end up going to 3 different supermarkets to get what you want, so be it, right? But that alone can make things a little easier. You learn to like, because if you get stuck, okay, I'm going to go to the supermarket closest to home and they don't have the things that you're used to or things that are similar. And maybe it destabilizes you at home too, because you're like, you can't cook the way you like. Just do it all, like visit all the places and learn where, who has what and what are the products that are similar to what you're using at home. And those things can really help, right? Just helps you get to know the place better. But it helps you also find that new normal for yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And it's a really, really great and important tip. We do it as well. At the beginning, I gotta share with you, I used to eat a lot of kale back in Israel. And when I arrived to France, I couldn't find kale in the supermarket. I visited, a couple of them. And then I discovered the market. And in the market, in certain seasons, some of the month of the year, they had kale. And I was like, woo, I found it.
Absolutely. Same experience here. And it's funny because kale grows in Tuscany. And yet Italians didn't know what kale was. Like in Milan, at least. I was living in Milan at the time and I couldn't find it anywhere. And one day I was walking through the market and I was like, oh, kale! Like it was this epiphany. Like I was so happy. And then these ladies started asking me, oh, like, how do you prepare it? And what do you use it to do? And I became this like, kale culinary expert at the market. But it was the same thing, right? Like but that, you bring up a really interesting point because living in Canada, at least, where it's like, we have 4 seasons in Canada, but the majority of them are winter. Like I always joke, like, because that's the longest one. And you do have 4 seasons, but the other seasons are just so short, right? And because we have such a long winter, seasonal food is not such a big thing in the sense that if you're only eating seasonally, you're going to really limit yourself into what you can eat in the winter. So you kind of have to eat out of season and non-local because things get imported. And so I was used to having everything all year long because things just got imported from places. And so when I got here in Italy, I really learned to eat seasonally and eat locally. And I discovered that, I mean, things are changing a little bit now. And, you do see imported foods, of course. But as a culture, they eat very locally and very seasonally, and which is also a great thing for our health, right? Because it helps keep us in harmony with our environment and with our surroundings. And it helps keep that sort of homeostasis in our bodies, that equilibrium, that balance. And it's a beautiful thing, but that I learned that maybe I won't be able to get kale all year round, and that's okay, right? There are other fruits and vegetables that I can enjoy in other seasons. And so that really changed the way I sort of approached, food and nourishment, just by being more sort of open to like local, seasonal, and trying things that I'd never seen before. That's actually one of the things I always recommend to my clients, regardless of where they live, whether they live home or abroad, but to just explore the supermarket. And you have more of an opportunity to do that when you're living abroad because things are new to you. And just try the things that you've never tried before, all the vegetables and the fruits that maybe like you couldn't find back home, or maybe you did, but they were exotic and you never really bothered. But
I'm thinking about it because really, like 2 days ago, we were in a supermarket and Mayan was like, every time I see a pineapple in Europe, I buy it, even if I don't want to, just because in Israel it was so expensive. And like,
I once paid like almost 20 euros for a
for
pineapple back in Israel. And now at the market they sell it for like under 2 euros, a euro and a half. Like, so every time I just buy a pineapple because I can, and it's here now. It's the season. It's okay. And I love that you mentioned seasonal food because we came, from Israel where there are no four seasons. It's
summer.
mostly summer, a little bit of spring, but that's it. So there is no seasonal eating. And in France, just like in Italy, it's so much more in the culture to eat what's seasonal. So, and it took me almost a year to understand the seasons and the food and how it changes, but it changes a lot the way that we eat
Yeah.
today. And I love it. And so you mentioned that you were walking in a supermarket and discovering new things and new ways of eating like seasonal food. Have you discovered any, specific food or eating habits that you love now in Italy?
yeah, I definitely think it's the seasonal and local that's kind of changed for me, because I've always been kind of a health nut. Like I like eating whole foods, and growing up also with in a Lebanese household, we were my mom was always cooked at home with fresh ingredients, and we didn't really eat a lot of processed foods. And so because that from our culture, it was always about cooking from scratch and making things, and so I was used to that, so I really always enjoyed that. And I think what shifted for me when I came here was that seasonal local approach, right? And just discovering new ways of preparing things that maybe I just wasn't exposed to in the past, based on regional recipes. Italy, and I think like France, is very regional in the way they eat. So even like sometimes within the same region, you can go from one town to the next and you discover a whole new way of making a certain dish. And so I do a lot of like fusion cooking, if you will, like where I mix like the way I know how to cook with like different regional cooking methods in Italy. Like I'll Google something and I might find a recipe that's similar to something I make, and maybe I like it ends up being like a mishmash of the two. And it's always really interesting because I learn how to I learned how to also cook better when I came here. Just exposed to new ingredients and new ways of cooking, and wanting to kind of like um, eat delicious and nutritious food. And it just having so many ingredients at my disposal, I think just felt so so fun and exciting, that it just made the kitchen that much more fun. So I think that those are two ways, I think, is the seasonal and local, but also the cooking more from scratch, and becoming more of an intuitive cook as well. So relying less on recipes and really just exploring and using your taste buds to guide you, and using your five senses to connect with the food. It's a beautiful, beautiful kind of experience. Yeah.
I love that you mentioned that using the five senses to enjoy the food and to explore it in general. But I also think that there is a big part of putting aside the stereotypes that are related to the different countries, because I hear so many people talking about, ooh, in Italy, they only eat pasta. And in France, they only have butter. And in in the UK, they don't know how to eat. Like, it's horrible. Like, people have those things. And then when they come, they're not willing to be open to discover what's local. And as you said, like, every little area and city and stuff has different ways to doing things. So they might eat a certain dish that you know from back home, but they do it differently. They add other spices, they add other cooking method, they do it in another way. So you can actually discover amazing things if you're just open to this and put aside what you thought you knew about a certain place before you arrive.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think those stereotypes can be, damaging to your experience too, because it doesn't allow you to open up your sort of your mind and your heart to new experiences and new things. And it's also partly what keeps you stuck in that past or in that sort of life that you had. I remember like I met someone online in one of those expat groups who was complaining about hating the food in Italy, and the restaurants were horrible because she couldn't get green smoothies, and I was like, well, you can make a green smoothie at home, right? Like, it's because she's from LA and she's used to LA where you get out and there's a green smoothie shop at every corner. And it's just a different way of living and eating, and Italians think it's weird to drink a green smoothie, like it's funny when I was making one once, my father-in-law says to me, "What are you doing? Are you blending your salad?" And it was really funny because I enjoy a green smoothie sometimes, and I make them for myself, and that comment really made me laugh because he's like, "Are you blending your salad?"
Yeah, it's a different culture, and I think this goes directly to my next question, because I know you're working with women from all over the world. Have you observed any differences in the way people from different cultures approach well-being in general?
So, okay, this is one of the things that I find, at least in the Western world, but even in like the westernized Eastern world, like I want to say, in our Western culture and our modern culture, I think there's still so much. And it seems to be, no matter what walk of life you come from, what culture you come from, there's diet culture, and that diet mentality and that narrative seems to be everywhere. It has spread, it has spread across the globe, and everybody has been influenced by it in some way, shape, or form. Now, how it manifests is a little bit different depending on where you're from. So, for example, I think there's still plenty of diet culture narrative here in Italy, and plenty of like toxicity when it comes to like the way people think about food and their bodies, and especially around May, like everybody's like, oh, prova costume, which is like the swimsuit, it's time to try on the swimsuits, right? So they call it the prova costume. So everybody starts to like panic about getting their body ready for summer. So there's still a lot of that. But what I did notice is that food is so sacred here. So even if people are like watching what they eat and they want to maybe slim down for the summer, there's still a bit of that diet mentality happening where people are like being influenced, but somehow it manifests a little bit differently. So if you're out at lunch with a group of people, or like out with, for dinner with friends, no one is watching what you eat. No one is commenting. No one is saying, no, I better not get that. But people are just enjoying themselves. They're eating. And it's just, there's this ritual around food, right? That food is still sacred. It's sacred. It's something that you enjoy and that you eat and that and I think that can be lost in some other, I think as a North American, I can see that gets sometimes lost, where people sort of carry that diet mentality out into like the social environment too. And it becomes really difficult, like I do see women here, don't get me wrong, like still dieting and maybe carrying that toxic mentality, like when it comes to home cooking and like, things like that. But then I see them enjoy food when they go out and just like, still have that experience. And I remember one of the first times back in 2007 when I had this, I was invited to a lunch with a group of, young people, and, it was like a group of people in their 20s, just feasting. We went out to the countryside, and we ate in this restaurant in this long table, and they just ordered, like, wasn't really ordered. The restaurant just kind of had these dishes on their menu, right? And they just brought like two of everything, and they put them in the middle of the table, and everybody just kind of ate. And, you try everything, and you explore, and you enjoy. And there's less of that sort of also overeating culture. Like, I think sometimes the overconsumption that can happen in at least the North American culture, right? Like, where you can tend to, eat yourself into a food coma. Even though Italians love to eat, there's less of that happening at the table, right? People eat to satiety, they enjoy their food, and then it's kind of done. And the same thing goes for like work lunches. Nobody eats hunched over at their desk, right? It might happen on occasion, like if someone's, I guess, is really, really busy, and it's not like it never happens. Like, I don't want to make it a stereotype, but it's not within the culture. Like, the culture is, again, lunchtime is sacred, food is sacred, meal times are sacred. And so the majority of people, the majority of the time, with some exceptions, that lunch hour, you take it, you go out, you leave your desk, you go to like the school, the office cafeteria, the canteen, and you enjoy a meal, or you go out. Most restaurants in the city have lunch menus for working people, so it's something that's faster. They can get it to you faster. So I don't know, you can go spend like, say, 12 euros, and you get like a primo and a coffee and maybe an antipasto or something like that. And so it creates that sort of also, that whole ritual around food, keeping it sacred and keeping that mealtime sort of, sacred, and a ritual for you to enjoy, to stop, to take a pause and nourish yourself. And so I find that to be a really beautiful way also of experiencing food, and just allows you to be so much more mindful of the whole process of eating, rather than just like scarfing down a sandwich or a salad as you answer emails or do whatever it is that you're doing. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I love that you share this, because we were having, we have a lot of conversation around food in our family, and I won't get into this, but we were just talking a couple of weeks ago about bringing the joy back to eating. And you mentioned enjoying your food so many times in this last couple of minutes. And I find it so important. And, in our Western society, we just lost it. We lost this joy.
It's like, on one hand, it's still there because you have those social gatherings around food. Even in like in France, in the UK, in Israel, you have social gatherings. Like, you meet people around food, but you mention it, and I feel it a lot of times. It has this toxic atmosphere around it, because you do meet around food, but it's very like, ooh,
You shouldn't eat this.
it's May. Are you sure you want to have this? Because you're not gonna get into your.
Did you add a salad? Did you have a salad already? Did you have some fruits for desserts? Like, oh, come on, leave my plate alone. Let's just enjoy this.
But I think it's that's why I said, like, it's a cultural thing. It became global. Every culture takes it in different ways. And there is, and I love that you said it's like, leave the toxicity aside, bring more the joy to what you're eating, because if you enjoy what you're eating, you will nourish your body as well in a more mindful way, and not only like guilt eating all the time, because that's the worst.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like what that's my philosophy is all about, sort of learning to nourish and care for yourself from a place of love and a place of compassion, and not from a place of, wanting to manipulate your body all the time. Just learning to love yourself. And part of loving yourself is nourishing and fueling your body. And I think when you can approach food nutrition, wellness, movement, whatever it is, the whole gamut of it, like the whole holistic wellness sphere, if you can approach it from a place of love and compassion and respect for yourself, and it becomes so much easier to make mindful choices because you're making them because you deserve it, not because you're punishing yourself for something, right? Because there's this whole, and this is what goes global, right? This whole toxic mentality of I don't deserve to eat a piece of cake because I have a little extra fat around my belly, right? Right? Like you kind of go, okay, like you're human, right? And you're always worthy and you're always deserving. And if you learn to eat the cake and the salad and the chips and the healthy proteins and healthy fats and all of those things, if you learn to eat them in with a state of balance and from a mindfully, in terms of like really listening to your body and what it needs in that moment, as opposed to restriction and sort of having this list of food rules that you're always following, and you're sucking the joy out of life that way, right? Like when you're always living by rules and restrictions and denying yourself, as opposed to just really tuning in, right? Tuning in inwards. So stop listening to all that outside noise that says, don't eat this, eat that, eat this much, not that much, because it's also confusing. There's just so much of it. Like for every piece of advice that you'll find out there, there's going to be another one that contradicts it and tells you, no, that's wrong. This is what you should do. And they're both supported by research, right? So it's like, well, who do you believe? And I think this is where it's really important to understand that we are unique individuals. Yes, there are guidelines, that we can follow. And for the most part, those guidelines apply to everyone for the most part. But how we then take those guidelines and make them work for us, research is helpful, it's guidance, but you're unique. You're not a statistic, right? So it's really important to go back and tune in and think, okay, like what works for me in my body? And how do I embrace my individuality and figure out what works for me? And I think that's the missing piece that you get out there when it comes to well-being, almost across the board and in all cultures. And I don't want to make a blanket statement, all cultures that I've been exposed to. So where I've lived and where I've had experience with people that, are from those cultures. So again, there may be cultures out there who don't do this, and I don't want to negate that, but it's that missing piece of what works for you. And people are like, I don't know. Most clients come to me like, I don't know what works for me. And that's the problem, right? Like, let's tune back in and learn what works for us as individuals and embrace that, and let go of all that rest of the stuff, right? Like,
Oh, I can relate so much, and I think I needed to hear you today as well. Like, and I'm sure women that are listening to our podcast will enjoy listening to this as well, because it's very true, but it's also very reassuring. Like we are each very unique. We need to find what works for us. Um, the food industry and the diet industry has messed with our heads in so many ways. And it's time to trust ourselves again. What works for us, do it from a place of love and compassion. It's a beautiful advice. And yeah, I just thank you because it really resonated. Um, you want to say something before I?
No, I totally agree with it. And I think those are really beautiful and amazing advices, especially for women, because this dieting thing is, a lot of women are concerned around this thing. And when moving abroad to a new country, we deal with so many stress and changes. And, around everything around food just get messed up a lot of time. We see so many women struggling around food, even if it was easy for them before, then just adapting to new changes, to new food culture, to new products, to and when you're going back to reconnect to yourself, I'm unique, I'll be kind to myself instead of punishing myself and try to restrict myself from so many things because research said this and this and that, and every day there's a new research, and that's it drives us crazy. Sometimes it drives us crazy. At least I know for me and you, and I know that some of our listeners as well. So thank you so much for sharing this.
I'm glad I could be of help.
This was very helpful. So it goes straight to my next question. Can you tell us a little bit more about Holisticniss and how women can get in touch with you?
Oh, yeah. So my coaching business is Holisticniss. You can find me at holisticniss.com and Holisticniss on all social media platforms. So I'm mostly active on Instagram. So you can either send me an email at info@holisticniss.com, a DM on Instagram, or by visiting my website. So I do private coaching, so one-on-one with clients. I also offer a group coaching program that I run a couple of times a year. And the focus is really on helping women reconnect to themselves again, right? So kind of figure out what works for them in this world of, overwhelming information, right? Because anybody can find information on the internet. You can Google it. You'll probably find a lot of answers and a lot of contradictory answers and feel confused and overwhelmed. And I find that it usually results in one of two things. You do nothing at all because of the overwhelm. So you're like, forget it, I don't even know where to start. Or you start following diet after diet after diet, and it just completely wreaks havoc on your relationship with food. And so my whole position is, let's just tune out the noise and tune back in. And that's what I help women do. So depending on the level of support that you need, how deep you want to go with your transformation, you can choose group or private coaching. So the group coaching will be a little lighter because, of course, it's happening in a group environment. And when you want to go a little bit deeper and really, we do a lot of mindset work with the one-on-one, like overcoming limiting beliefs, obstacles, and challenges that sort of keep you stuck in unsupportive patterns. And that's stuff we can really go deep with the one-on-one that we can't really do as much. We can still do it with the group, but not so much, because I find that that's really what holds a lot of women back. They come into it with, I don't have time for self-care, because they imagine self-care being hours at the spa, right? When in reality, it's not. There's a lot of things you can do with your self-care on a daily basis that don't require any money, and they don't require a lot of time. They imagine, eating healthy doesn't come naturally to me. That could be true, but it could also be this limiting belief that you have around what eating healthy means, right? And when we dissect that and deconstruct it, and kind of, we do a lot of that with the one-on-one work to really help women sort of get back in touch with their innate signals, and begin to make choices mindfully. And of course, I teach education around nutrition because it's important, because that could also be the key, when it comes to confidence in the way that you nourish yourself. Knowing how it works and how your body reacts to food is really important, instead of just listening to all the fear mongering out there, right? Of, well, no, don't eat that because it's bad for you. Well, first learn what it does in your body, and then you decide how bad it is or how good it is for you, right? Because nothing is ultimately good or bad, right? It's all about sort of reactions in the body, and only you know how something is going to affect you. So yeah, that's the that's what you get in a sort of private one-on-one experience. And then in the group you get a lot of that too, but just in a different format. It's a different, more DIY format with some group guidance. Yeah.
That's amazing and so important, I think, for every human on earth, but especially women, and especially women going to live in another country or living in another country.
Yeah.
So, and of course, all your website and Instagram will be also, tagged on this episode, of course.
Yes. So to finish our amazing episode, we have a last question that we ask all of our guests. And it is, what does a smooth and positive move abroad means to you?
Ooh, okay. So, when I imagine a smooth and positive move abroad, I can't leave out sort of organization and planning. So, I think that can be a huge part of it. If you plan ahead a little bit, sort of do your research, get to know sort of the culture a little bit, find out a little bit more about, I mean, you're never going to fully know it until you submerge yourself in it, but some research is always helpful, maybe do a little research on the city or town that you're going to live in, find out, where things are near your home. So I think a lot of that can really make things so much more smooth, right? So kind of planning and organizing around that, but even important things like doctors and dentists and things that you might need. I think it's important to kind of know where they're going to be, how you can access the services, know a little bit about the culture and how to behave, how to speak in a way that sort of elicits positive feedback and gets people to support you as opposed to work against you, right? I think it's really, really important. And the other part, I think, is really about your mindset. Your mindset of, going into it with an open mind and an open heart and the willingness to learn and grow, and not be stuck in your old ways and gripping onto your old life, for dear life, right? So kind of letting go. So I think those two things really for me is like the planning and organization and the mindset are huge, because if you have both, it's hard to have a bad experience. Like it's hard because everything, the planning and organizing may not make everything super smooth. You may still miss something, but if you've got that open mind, that'll sort of help, right? That sort of mindset of, I'm going to embrace it. What comes, whatever will be, right? As the Italians say, che sarà, sarà. Whatever will be, right? Kind of learn to sort of embrace that.
Amazing.
That's really, really good. And I want to thank you for being here with us today. It was a big pleasure. I love this conversation so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Nissrine, for being here with us today. And thank you for joining us on the Coffee Talkie Show, the podcast for women living abroad. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode and gained valuable insights, tips, and inspiration for your journey as an expat.
If you have any questions, comment, or suggestions for future episodes, please feel free to reach out to us via our website or social media. And if you loved what you heard today, please like, follow, and leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, sending positive vibes your way.